Hello and welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. Welcome to this week's episode where we will be looking at The Light Between Oceans by M.L.Stedman. Now, it was published in 2009 and then it was adapted to screen in 2012. Now, please remember that obviously I will discuss three things. The how good is the film, how good is the book, and how well does the plot take from the book. So we'll be discussing everything in detail. So if you've not either seen the film or read the book and you wish to do so, please do that before you get to the plot section, because obviously that is where I'll be discussing everything in its entirety. So, first things first, film. Now, this isn't a film that typically I would watch. In fact, Michael watched it ages ago when it sort of was first released, whereas I was sort of like, I'm not that bothered about it, so it wasn't on my to watch list. But then, because my friend Hannah for Christmas got me a blind date with a book, which is a really good idea, by the way, guys. You really should do that. And so this is the book that came in the blind date with a book. Luckily for Hannah, it wasn't a repeat of any of the other hundreds of books I already own. But because of that, I decided to do it for my channel. And so I was like, right, well, okay, I'll watch the film. Now, it is quite a slow moving film at first. I'm just gonna put that out there. I do get bored easily. I know that obviously mobile phone generation, our attention span isn't that great, but sometimes I just need things to be happening to keep my attention. Whereas unfortunately the film, it was lovely to start, and it was a good film, but it was so slow at the start that I was kind of just sat there being like, I want to check my phone, I want to play a game. But it then sort of started to pick up, and it's basically about a couple that, a gentleman comes back from the war, and he goes off to this remote island to become a lighthouse keeper, and then he strikes up a relationship with someone on the mainland, and they end up going out to Janice Island, looking after the lighthouse, and unfortunately she loses children in miscarriages. So basically, what happens is this boat rocks up, and it's got a baby that's alive in it, but a man who's dead, and she convinces him to keep the baby because she's only recently just lost one of her own. And so basically, it's so good at looking into the hearts of people, because I straight away was like, no, you need to report the child. And then I was like, well, actually, if they've gone missing and things like that. And it was very good in the film, and in how you could see the anguish of the mother, who thinks her child is dead at sea, but you see the anguish of the mother who's lost two children out on an island and now has a chance to raise a child that she doesn't think anyone's missing. And then you see this poor gentleman stuck in the middle, knowing that there is someone on the mainland who's lost his child, but if he gives the child back to this woman on the mainland, his wife will be completely broken. And it's just it looks into the whole loneliness thing, because obviously a lot of people during COVID and during the last few years have been in isolation. I mean, recently I was just in isolation, and I was basically locked down in this flat for just a week, well, a weekish, where I wasn't even allowed to leave this flat, and it gets to you. And I had my husband to keep me company, but it is just sort of like, you feel isolated, you feel cut off. And especially now, I mean, we've got all sorts of technology, but back then, when the book was set, they wouldn't have been able to just call someone. They only have someone come out to the island once every 3 months, and it's just two people that come out with supplies. So it's such an intriguing look into what this loneliness and what this isolation can do to you, and can do to your mentality, basically. And as a film, as I said, it started off really slow. It did. And at one point, I only really stuck with it because I really wanted to do this for my channel. But it did pick up, and it was very interesting to watch. And I would recommend it. I probably won't rewatch the film, I'm not gonna lie, but I did enjoy watching it for the first time. And I've given it a 6 out of 10 for me, because I do think it is something that, it's got such an interesting take, and it's so well cast, that it's thoroughly enjoyable. So the book, as I said, it was a blind date with a book, and it is one that occasionally I've sort of picked up and gone, oh, maybe I'll get this one, maybe I won't. But I mean, the hook is brilliant. It says, this is a story of right and wrong and how sometimes they look the same. And just that hook gets you, because sometimes you can do wrong for doing right, but sometimes you could do right for doing wrong. And it's very, very similar to the film, and I will discuss that with the plot momentarily. But basically, the idea of this isolation, and then you see this love blossoming, but then you see the cracks appearing of the sanity of this poor woman, because in the film she seems a lot older, whereas in the book she's said as being 19. And poor Isabel, literally at the age of 19, goes out to this this wilderness essentially with just her and her husband, and she's got nothing else, and she loses children, and then she has this child. And I'm not gonna, it was heartbreaking when I was reading through it, and I feel like the book definitely adds a more complex nature to it, because it is harder to do on film, but in the book you get the thoughts in the head, you get the nuances, you get the character building a lot more as well. But it's beautiful how you've got these two parallels. So you've got the couple on the mainland, she's lost her son, her daughter, sorry, and her husband, as we know, is the dead guy in the boat, but her daughter's still alive. But for all intents and purposes, she's been told her daughter's dead and her husband's dead as far as she knows. And then when she gets a note saying, your husband's at peace, but your daughter is fine, she's obviously really concerned, and she wants the child to be safe. And the way it builds up and the way it goes, it's just so good, and it keeps you hooked, because you want to, you want everyone to be happy. But when you get to the point where Isabel is betrayed by her husband, because her husband reveals deliberately, but not in a way that Isabel knew, that they have the daughter, and then when she realizes it was, everything's crashed around, she just breaks down, and you just see it. And it's mentioned more in the book that she's unable to have any more children, whereas in the film, it's just sort of after the couple of miscarriages, she doesn't sort of look like she's trying. And I would give this book a read. I really did enjoy it. I will definitely reread this at some point. And I cannot recommend this enough. And as I said, blind date with a book. I mean, who knew? Who knew it would crack up such a quite a good book? So I would give that one an 8 out of 10 for me. At times, and I think it's because I've not gone through the similar situation. Like, obviously, I've not gone into a lighthouse keeper. I've not lost any children. So I can't imagine how that would feel. And I can't imagine how finding a live child in a boat and wanting to keep it and raise it and everything would do this. So I sometimes did get a little bit annoyed at Isabel being like, can you not understand that a mother has lost her child? This child is not yours. But as I said, I have not been through that situation, so I do not know what that would be like. And it's just so interesting when you go, but would you keep the child? If you thought that its mum had died and its dad is obviously dead, would you keep the child? Would you raise the child? Would you then give up the child if you knew that the mum was still alive? And it was just brilliantly written. Brilliantly written. So the plot. Now, normally I go through the plot, as I said at the beginning of this, in its entirety. However, the book and the film were pretty much spot on. It was absolutely fantastic. It was, they both start the same. They both have Tom coming out to Janice Island, taken over at the lighthouse, falling in love with Isabel moving out there, losing her children, finding the baby in the boat. They go back to the mainland. Tom realizes that the baby is missed, and then leaves a note for the mother. Then the mum tries to find the baby. Then a silver rattle is left, and then obviously someone recognizes the silver rattle. The little Grace is then given back to the original mum. The original mum is then absolutely heartbroken because Grace obviously doesn't recognise her as a mum and is about 4 years old at the time she gets returned. So she obviously is constantly crying for Isabel, who's not the real mum. And then it basically ends the same way, where Isabel and Tom move away from their home, out of the way, and they say that they're never going to sort of contact Grace, try to contact Grace again. And then at the end, Isabel unfortunately passes away, and Grace comes back as a grown adult with her own little child. And then there's a letter left behind explaining everything, And Grace then builds up a relationship with Tom as sort of like a surrogate grandfather, well, surrogate father and then grandfather for the son. And it's just, oh, it's delightful. Honestly, it's almost identical. There's a couple of little bits, but realistically, they kept the true heart of the book. They kept the true narrative of the book. You know, they didn't put like a Hollywood twist on it. They kept the heart and soul of what it was, of what the decisions were. And it was so well done, because as I said, when I watched the film, I was a little bit like, oh, this is a bit slow moving. When I read the book, it didn't feel as slow moving. But then when I compared the two, I realised that they were pretty much identical, and I felt that was such a good move, because it's not often that this happens. I mean, it gets a 9 out of 10 for adaptation for me. It really does. And I would recommend reading the book or watching the film or doing both, because it's a surprising nice narrative, and it does have heartbreak in there, and it does have, you know, good moral dilemmas. But what I loved about it is a lot of the time I get really, I'm not a prude, but when there's like overt sex scenes in books or films, I tend to, like, if there's one on a film, I just start playing with my phone. If there's one in a book, I'll skip ahead, because I don't feel comfortable. And this did not have like overtly, like, it didn't have, you know, I'm not going to say words because obviously I'm trying to keep this oh my god, I've lost the ability to speak, so I'm not going to say anything too smutty. But it was just nice. Just the whole story was nice, and it had just such a lovely backbone to it, and it stood up on its own. And honestly, I mean, this is just my opinion. If you agree or disagree with anything that I say, if you try out the blind date with a book, please do let me know in the comments, and I'd love to know what you end up with. I mean, the one that I got had little hot chocolate sachets in it, because obviously I don't drink tea or coffee, so it had little hot chocolate sachets, which I've used all of them. It had like a little shortbread biscuit. It had like a couple of bookmarks. Obviously I sell my own bookmarks, I don't really need them, but it's such a great idea. But if you do try blind date with a book, let me know. If you enjoyed this book or this film, please let me know. If there's anything that you'd like me to do, leave it below in the comments. As you're well aware, I now do one book to film adaptation a month, and it's the last Friday of the month. Other than that, I do book reviews now. But thank you so much for your continued support, guys, and remember to always keep it contento.